Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host, Simon Conboy. It's another episode of the Quarterback Quandary series today. If you've not seen this series before, it's where I take a team that has a question mark at that particular position, of course the most important position in the sport, discuss the state of the current group, what options are possibly available if the starter does not work out this year, and also the long-term future at the position. Gone through most of the teams that have a clear and desperate need, so we're starting to delve a bit further. Today's episode will be focusing on the New York Giants. Now, to most casual fans, I suppose there is no question here. Eli Manning is the quarterback, and considering his age, you'd think he'd have a good 2, 3, maybe even 4 seasons in him. Based on what I saw last season, that might not be the case. I understand that this is a team that had poor offensive line play and a non-existent run game. Absolutely the case. Can't hold that against Eli. Made his job harder. However, he did not look particularly good for the vast majority of last season. Oddly, I think the playoff game where they were eliminated, he actually started that game pretty well. It was one of his better performances early in that game, but then that fell apart as well. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand what kind of an impact those issues have. Teams can sit and play coverage when there's very little threat. You can just rush 4 all day long when the pass protection's not good. If the 4 are getting there, you're going to drop back 7. There's no threat of a run game. It makes play calling significantly easier, makes the passing game a lot more difficult. But I do think there's a pretty talented group of receivers there in New York, and I just don't think Eli did enough. I thought his arm lacked some velocity, didn't look like he's got much zip left. Fairly similar to how his brother looked for the last few years, except of course in Peyton's case, barring that very final season, he had the know-how to make up for it. And let's face it, Peyton didn't have much of a run game or an offensive line during those runs that the Broncos made. He made do. Had a good group of receivers, much like Eli. He made it work. I just think what I saw from Eli last year just simply wasn't good enough. If he hadn't had the career that he'd had, I think there'd be a lot more heat on him. There have been some that have questioned, his long-term status, but I think for the most part, people just kind of accepted that he's the guy. And I'm not ruling out that that's a possibility. If he returns to a degree of form next season, then I think, the status quo is resumed, and you've got maybe, you look at him as a starter for another 2, 3 seasons. However, I think if last year wasn't a fluke and that was just a sign of the player that he's perhaps become, I don't think the Giants will have any choice but to look to move on. I certainly think this is a team that's considering the future at the position. I think it'd be wise to. They kind of got no choice at this point. I think this is a roster as well that is pretty darn good for the most part. I think defensively, we've got one of the best front fours in football, one of the best secondaries in football. So that defence I expect to be very good again next season. I think the receiving group, especially with the additions of Brandon Marshall and Evan Ingram, is going to be one of the better groups in the league. Sterling Shepard had a very good rookie season. The offensive line and the run game are absolutely concerns, but I think you have to add Eli to that group at this point in time. You look at the current roster also, you've got Geno Smith behind him, and I think we've seen enough of Geno Smith to think he's not realistically going to be given a shot as the long-term quarterback. I think he'd have to really impress. Now, I do think Geno Smith actually has a good enough skill set to be an NFL starter. I would question his maturity getting into a fight with a teammate, and he didn't seem to be particularly liked in the locker room. I think that's a massive concern. But I absolutely think if he could get his head on straight, I do think he's got the arm talent and some of the physical tools in terms of his ability to run, his size, to actually be a productive NFL quarterback. Not sure that will ever end up being the case, frankly. But even if Eli does come back, I think this is a team that has a question mark at that position for the long term. Of course, Eli's age now. They have to start looking at options. I expect the Giants to either flame out and end up maybe with 5 or 6 wins if Eli cannot produce, because I don't, as I say, if he can't produce, I don't think this offense goes anywhere. I think the defense is going to be very good again. But I think last year this team managed to sort of battle its way through a lot of games, elements of luck. They may be able to do that. They do have the potential to make explosive plays, but I don't know. I just can't see 2 years of that level of things falling their way occurring. Lots of timely turnovers, teams making mistakes. Now, a lot of that was down to the quality of the defence, but I wouldn't be shocked if this team really does disappoint, especially in that division where you frankly never know what's going to happen. And if that is the case, then I think they absolutely will start looking elsewhere. They'll be in a much better position to do so. I think that's the sort of spot where you could look at potentially getting Josh Rosen. Not sure where he'll be available if he declares. I think Darnold is clearly going to be in the running for the number 1 overall pick, assuming he continues his vein of form. Similar with Josh Allen, I think his skill set will get him drafted very high. I think Jackson, the Louisville QB, I think he's certainly a possibility, especially if they're finishing that kind of range with his size and the style of offense that he plays in. A team will take him highly. His stats are impressive, and won the Heisman last year. So I think there's certainly a possibility he goes in the first, and I think he's the kind of player that would fit right into that range, along with Rosen. My projections at the minute, I would assume Darnold and Allen are going to be top 5 sort of picks. So it may come down to some of the other guys. Once at some point, I'm going to start looking at some more of the quarterbacks, and of course, once the college season starts, that will also help. But I think even if Eli does play well, they're definitely going to look to acquire somebody. Not much coming up in free agency. As ever, the odds of finding a quarterback through free agency are always incredibly slim. Teams don't let those guys leave, and understandably so. I can't see this team taking a flyer on a guy like Kaepernick either. So it will certainly be interesting to see how Eli performs. Long term, as I say, they've got to look to get someone in next year, especially with what we saw from Eli last year. I don't think he's going to be in the league a huge amount of time. I really don't. He's always been a bit scattershot as well. Certainly not the most consistent of those kind of top tier quarterbacks. But yeah, honestly, last year really was that concerning for me. And I think considering some of the overall talent on this roster, the team will need to be ruthless if he delivers a similar level of performance next year. I really do think that they will start to look elsewhere in the first round. If this team sort of finishes below 500, we could be looking at a new starting quarterback for the Giants, especially this is a team that doesn't have a huge amount of salary cap room. Eli, of course, does eat up a large chunk of that. And as I say, I don't think the answer's on the roster in Geno Smith. So there you have it. That's the Giants. What do you guys think? Do you think Eli's done? Do you think last year was just an aberration, a function of the offense around him being somewhat broken? Let me know, whether it's in the comment section below. Find us on Facebook under Cover Zero. Find me on Twitter at Simon Conboy. I'm more than happy to discuss these things, or any other team you think's got a QB issue. It's always fun to talk ball. And as always, if you've enjoyed this, check out some more episodes of the show. Going to have my paper power rankings coming out. That's where a power ranking is based solely on the quality of the rosters, and I've tried to break down basically each individual position, what position group for each team, ranks them against all the others to come up with some numbers. And I think that's going to be really interesting. I definitely recommend checking that out. That'll be up at some point once I've got all the graphics ready for that. I think that'll be a decent one. Got another episode of Cover Who tomorrow. There's plenty of stuff on the channel. Check it out. It'd be greatly appreciated. Like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Really do appreciate it. Hope you've enjoyed it. And have a great day. And as always, go Bucks.